Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Boost your organization's data resiliency with the right management platform. Data is the crown jewel of most modern organizations, and data-driven decision-making helps you to stand out from the competition. But data is also an attractive target for attackers and can create management headaches if it's stored incorrectly. You need to know the data you look after is fully protected at all times, wherever it's stored, with the ability to act quickly to restore backups in the event of an attack. Small organizations often lack the resources to get the most from their data, and they're a growing target for cybercriminals. A managed security platform which combines scalability, cost effectiveness, and visibility can help those businesses and larger ones to overcome data manageability and protection challenges. In this webinar, we're going to use bespoke research by computing to examine the advantages of SaaS-based data protection over traditional hardware, software, and appliance-based solutions. We'll explore the challenges IT leaders are facing when it comes to managing their organization's data and how they can be solved. Finally, we'll consider key talking points for industry today like AI, zero trust, and the changing regulatory landscape, as well as how SaaS-based data protection fits within that. So joining me today to discuss this, we've got Colin West, Director of Solutions Engineering at Druva, and Ellen Daniel, who's the Senior Content Strategist at the Channel Company. My name is Tom Allen. I'm the Editor of Computing, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. So before we begin, Colin, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself and the topic.
So morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you watch this. My name is Colin West, and I am the Senior Director for the SE team within Druva. I look after the international markets, so pretty much anything outside of the US. That's what my team will cover. I've been with Druva now for kind of 4.5 years. Before that, I was 4.5 years with Dell. Before that, a couple of years with Tenable. Before that, 17 years with Veritas. So I've been in the industry looking at protecting data for well over 30 years. And kind of in that time, I've seen so many changes as predominantly we were protecting data on premise. Now we've moved to, and this is what predominantly Druva do, protecting data in the cloud, from on-premise to the cloud, from cloud vendors to the cloud. And it really generates this challenge around making sure, I call it the last line of defense, which making sure that you've got your data protected in this world of ransomware, malware attacks. So hopefully, Tom, that gives you an introduction about me and obviously what we're going to be talking today, and I'll take it from there.
Certainly does. Yeah, you've got a fine pedigree, Colin. So can't wait to dig into that and hear your opinions on some of the research that we've done here. So I'm going to hand over to Ellen to introduce our first set of research in just a second. But before I do, just one point of housekeeping, which is that you are free to ask questions throughout this webinar. We will get to them as and when we can. You can use the box right below my face now. It's just down there. To ask anything, and we'll see it as soon as you do. So without that, that being said, over to Ellen for our first set of research.
Thanks, Tom. So for today's webinar, we surveyed 110 IT decision makers involved in data security at their respective organizations. And for this first finding, we asked them where their data is stored. And the majority said that they're using a combination of on-prem and cloud storage, with 36% storing most of their data on-prem and 27% storing it mainly in the cloud. Just 16% have an even split between the two, and 12% are entirely using cloud storage and 7% are entirely on-prem. And this is to be expected. They're using a combination of different data storage methods to store different types of data. And in this next finding, we drilled a bit deeper into the type of solutions they're using to protect this data. So are they using cloud-based data protection? 74% said they are using cloud-based data protection, with 16% answering no and 10% unsure. Cloud-based data protection is needed to secure data in a cloud environment, wherever that data might be located. So cloud data protection offers more modern alternative to legacy solutions. It offers reduced complexity, reduced downtime, and reduces the on-site data protection costs, which might be attractive for a lot of organizations. And now in this third finding, we asked whether they're using a single system to manage data across multiple workloads. And this is a key part of how data is managed, as if they don't have a complete view of their data, then they can encounter problems. 27% said that they currently have a single system to manage data across multiple workloads. And this suggests that for the rest of the organizations, they may lack a comprehensive overview of their security across different environments, which can create silos, visibility issues, and management headaches overall. And this is going to be especially key for those using a mixture of on-prem and cloud storage, which we saw in our previous finding. And this fourth finding here, we asked whether they have a SaaS data protection solution. There was a fairly even split here between those that do have a SaaS data protection solution and those that do not. And this might depend on a number of factors, including the size of the organization and the resources that they have to manage their data internally versus externally. And this looks likely to increase in the future with the rise of the as-a-service model.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Great findings there that Colin and I are going to dig into and have a lot of fun doing so. So Colin, Ellen mentioned SaaS-based data protection there. Can you tell us, just expand on what exactly SaaS data protection is, how it differs from legacy tools, and anything else that I might have missed there?
Yeah, it's consequently where the data will get stored. So traditionally, obviously years ago, we would be storing data on-premise in some kind of, maybe it could be on-premise storage, NAS storage, etc. But something that has to be managed, contains power, something that has to be patched, something you can physically look and see, okay, in your environment, whether it be data center, office, whatever. We've now moved on to where you can't see that anymore. It's a service-based offering, and it's provided by many of our, the cloud vendors today. So we work very closely with our public cloud vendor, which is AWS. So consequently, what we're doing is they provide a service, which is where they can store data. We run in that service, and we provide our customers the ability to back up, not on premise anymore, but via the internet, or if you're already in a particular cloud vendor, rather than what we call the superhighway, being able to take that data at source, moving it across into the destination, which is a service inside a cloud, and then we store the data there. It's object-based, which is the normal thing, which means that the data by default cannot be updated in any way. It can be added to, it can be read, and then other facilities make it things like immutable. So we'll get onto this a bit later, but it's the security of that data to make sure that no matter what happens, all right, you'll be able to get your data back. Okay.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about immutable data before here on computing. Can you dig into that concept a little bit?
Yeah, so the immutability can be different to different people. It's got many different definitions. The definition that the way I look at it is you need to have, when the data gets stored, it needs to be stored in a way that it's just not easily read by a third party. It must be able to be read by the application that stored it, okay? It needs to be encrypted, whether the data is encrypted in flight to get there and also encrypted at rest. And once it's there, it needs to be maybe moved in a different way, looked at it. So metadata is in one place, data is in another place. And that individual data, like basically like a puzzle, like different parts of a puzzle, those pieces put together mean that the application is the only one that can read those pieces, put it together to restore it. It needs to be an ability. We've moved forward into mutability that cannot be deleted unless policies defined it. So like retention, so say you hold data for 5 years, it stays there, it cannot be deleted until it gets to 5 years. So this kind of what we define it as, the ability, again, going back to my strap line, as it were, last line of defense. When you come to restore it, it's there. Okay.
Thanks for that, Colin. Coming back to the research there, we saw that more than a quarter of respondents who said that they might not be using cloud-based data protection. Now, considering that pretty much everyone is using some form of cloud storage, what's the reasoning there? Why might they not be using cloud-based data protection?
Well, it comes from where people may have come from, and we call them legacy systems they may have bought years ago, and they continue. But we haven't been attacked. We've had no problem. Let's keep the status quo. Let's just keep going, and let's back up locally. Unknowingly seeing maybe other teams and all the work they have to do to keep that on-premise storage running. I'm talking about getting the firmware versions up to date. Is the networking going to be connected? Is it firewalled? All of these things are worried about that business. So I think it's a traditional, legacy that people have just inherited. And now new projects are coming up, new RFPs, RFIs, where they're starting to think, hang on, this is costing us a lot of money. We need to start thinking about a different way of storing our data. And then obviously the answer more and more is now coming down to clouds. Okay. Yeah.
We also saw there in Ellen's research that about 3/4, slightly just under 3/4, maybe 70%, said they either let me just scroll back to research. They either don't have a single system to manage, so they're using multiple systems to manage their data, or they're unsure about that. In this context, we can probably take that to mean that, yeah, they are using multiple systems. They don't just have a single pane of glass type approach. So let's talk about that a bit. That's quite a pain point, especially if you have your data spread across lots of different places. It can lead to siloed data. You can lack resources. So what are the outcomes there? And I think another question that's just occurred to me there is this a split that we often see between, depending on the size of company? Is this more common in SMEs, or is it more common in enterprises that might have that big legacy backend that you talked about?
Yeah. So Tom, really the most of our larger organizations, maybe organizations over 3,000 employees, we tend to see them having multiple solutions. Now, they may have grown up by acquiring other companies, and then they've got a backup solution, they've got a backup solution, and they acquire. But we're seeing most of our organizations with more than 3 or 4 backup solutions. Now, there's a knock-on effect to this problem. And the problem is, like you said, multiple different administration points, multiple different things. Like if you do use single sign-on, you've got to make sure you've got a sign-on from this backup app, this backup app, this backup app. And we saw that it's recently an attack on one of our retirement home companies recently in the UK. Only a small, literally, we're only talking about maybe 30, 40 employees. But they had 4 backup systems, right? Because they'd grown up over time. And unfortunately, when they were attacked, they got everything was taken out. So you can imagine this particular company had on-premise VMware technology. They had a messaging system. They had an email system, and every single component was taken out. The challenge was they had a backup solution for each component. Now, in this particular example, Druva was protecting the VMware technology. We got that back up and running after a full ransomware attack within 24 hours, all up running. Unfortunately, to date, those other the backup of the messaging system, the 365, and also they had a NAS environment. They haven't been able to recover a single block of data yet because the attack was so bad. They were on premise. That's where their back end was. Just wiped it out. So I think people should start to think, well, how many, it's almost like, let's have a look at our organization. How many backup solutions have we got? What's the security on them? Do we need all those? And start to think about, the consequence of having to patch everything, look at the vulnerability of all these things and trying to consolidate. So that's the whole point. I'm seeing more and more, Tom, people starting to consolidate.
I'm really glad that you talked about security there, because that's exactly what our next set of research findings delves into. So I'm going to hand over to Ellen, because this seems like a very appropriate moment to do so, to talk about security of SaaS storage. So Ellen, take it away.
Yes, so as Tom said, this next set of research delves a bit deeper into organizations' security posture. And in this first finding, 86% of respondents that their backup data has never been compromised by a ransomware attack. This seems fairly low. We typically expect it to be slightly more people who have experienced ransomware attacks, and this can be for a number of reasons. Maybe they do in fact have the right layers of protection in place, or they might have a different definition of what counts as a breach. There's also the possibility that they're unaware of a potential compromise. Perhaps they don't have the right level of visibility into that, or maybe they're reluctant to admit that their backup data has been affected. And in this next finding, we look at how long it would take to recover from a ransomware attack. 29% said it would take them less than a day to fully restore their data, with 28% saying it would take them 1 or 2 days. 21% answered 2 or 7 days, and 9% said it would take over a week. The speed at which data can be restored is obviously crucial to business continuity following an attack. So organizations must ensure that they have the right tools and strategy in place to act quickly as and when a breach occurs. And this next finding asks whether they've lost data as a result of a cyber attack. Just 10% that they have just 10% that they have experienced data loss as a result of a cyber attack, with 83% confident that they have not. Again, this seems like a high number who have not experienced data loss. And in this final finding for this set of research, we asked which of the following applies to organizations' backups. 76% said that they have backup data that is not exposed to external clients, with 49% saying they have rollback actions. 40% said that operations on data have to be authenticated. And just 7% said that fingerprinting at ingest, and a further 7% said that all write-ups are done out of place. This has implications for the immutability of data backups, as we discussed earlier, whether backup data can be tampered with or deleted. And this is especially important now that adversaries are increasingly attacking backup data and the rise of triple extortion attacks.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, we'll dig into triple extortion attacks in a few minutes. But the thing that really stood out to me about that research was the really high percentage of people who said that their backup data had never been affected and that they'd never lost data to a ransomware attack. So, Colin, does that mean that that's true and they're really top tier on security? We just happened to pick out a lot of people who were really, really good at security, or that they just didn't know?
I think there's two thoughts there, Tom. One, a lot of people don't want to admit if they've been attacked or not. It's kind of one of these things that you go, well, I don't want to show my customers that we've been attacked. So one is it's sharing that information and thinking, well, what was people going to be using? So that's part one, I think. But part two, I think people generally don't know, Tom, if have they been attacked or not. So I've been doing some joint work with some vendors, and whose job, all they do is they focus on security, they focus on understanding, the threat landscape, things like that. They're not into backup. All they do is just make sure that they provide that wall to stop stuff coming in. And they were telling me that the amount of attacks going on right now, where they don't even encrypt the data, they just literally go in, infiltrate it, then exfiltrate it out without people even knowing. So I think there's the two thoughts. One, don't want to let us know. Number two, they just generally don't know they've been attacked, really.
So that's quite clearly a visibility issue. What's the solution there? If they don't know, that seems like a really basic thing for anyone working in IT, or especially in security. You need to know when you've been attacked.
Yeah, Tom. So it's a hard one. So obviously there are tools out there to analyze things like traffic that's coming in and coming out. Is it going to a bad IP address? You've seen those things, but that's not our game. So the way that we look at it in two parts. Number one, we always look at differences between backups. We use basically an entropy-based solution as like a baseline. And what we're looking at is your data normal backup rates, right? What you're expecting, how many deleted files, how many created files. And what we do is that diff every single day, every single file is touched by a backup, by the way, and that's an advantage of a data protection solution. And we will then say, oh, by the way, we've just seen a load of files being touched. Now, a recent customer just had their INI files on their Windows systems updated. A Trojan was inserted. No encryption happened. They just did that, took the data out because they were able to create what we like a backdoor, and then they were able to. So one thing that we can do is detect that change across multiple machines. So that's one thing that we can do. The other thing is a lot of data is taken out using APIs, REST API calls. And we track every single API call coming out, for example, out of the data protection solution we have. It's like we call an event, and we pass it on to things like scene tools that out there that store that data, log analyzing tools. So we can track that API usage and see, oh, is that abnormal? Should Bob be taking data out? So there's a couple of ways that we can analyze how data is being used in that case there, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. Very interesting. Well, actually, what particularly stood out for me there, before we continue on looking into the research, is that you were able to identify something that had something being inserted into data rather than data exfiltration, which is what a lot of people look for to determine if they've been attacked. So it is generally understood these days that a successful attack is a case of when, not if. Like we know that at some point we're going to have to deal with the consequences of a cyber attack. It may be an unsuccessful one, but we're going to deal with it. Now, if that attack is successful, how do you recover? I realize that's a big question, but what are some of the initial steps you have to take to start the recovery process?
Yeah, good question, Tom, because really it's all about preparing, creating what I call it a run book. The things that you need to start preparing for. And the very first thing that what happens, when the phones go white hot with problems to the help desk saying, we can't get to this file, we can't get to this email. The first thing is you need to kind of pause, stop, and start obviously bringing in your incident response team that you may have created. You may be a small 2 or 3 person organization, but you need to start thinking, this is what we're going to do. It's part of our run book. And the first thing you start to do is you start to investigate what we call the blast radius. What machines, what applications, let's find out what's being attacked first so we understand the problem statement. In an organization that we were only dealing with a few weeks ago, their sole attack was purely at a SQL server, because they were trying to steal IP out of that SQL server. Okay, so when we looked at where the attack was, it was just focused on one machine, and then there are other ones who were more opportunistic kind of, phishing attacks had occurred, where they literally kind of wiped everything out. Okay, it was more for trying to hold that person to ransom. There was a few issues with people wanting notoriety, in other words, to say, look what we've done as well. So once you've got that blast radius and you understand, what has been attacked, I think the next step is thinking, well, what is it we're going to do now? We understand this is what's attacked. The obvious straight away, well, let's go and restore, right? No, you've got to then, this is the next point you've got to pause and you've got to think, well, should I be restoring to live? Or should I be restoring to what we call a sandbox, or a test environment first? You think, well, why would you do that? Well, what we don't want to do is restore the same kind of problems back to the live environment. So normally, change files, ransomware files, etc., have been there for a few weeks. So the backups would have been backing them up. So literally, if you just restore, back to live, and you think, oh, I'm all done, literally it'll re-encrypt. So what you've got to do is literally restore what we call to clean. And one of the things that you'll find what Druva have been working hard at is creating what we call a curated snapshot, which what it does is it is clean. We've taken all the files out before we've actually restored it. And then you get to the point where you've restored to clean. So from that initial attack, you're following your run book, instant responses kicked in, you've understood your blast radius, you've decided I'm going to either restore to a sandbox or use technology like we've got to clean the data before restoring to live. And then you can get the service up and running. And it takes from there, Tom. So it's run book's important. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Colin. Looking at the very last slide that Ellen showed there, it's pretty obvious that IT leaders are taking steps to protect their backup data. But aside from keeping their backup data away from external clients, nobody answered. It was always under 50% for everything else. Like fewer than half our respondents said they were following any particular one point. So what are the major steps everyone should be taking to protect their backups?
I think that it starts with, I mean, I call it layers. Okay. So the underlying layer should be, number one, where is your data being stored and is it secure? That's the starting point. So if it's stored in the cloud, it's stored on premise, okay, it's got to have that, what we call an air-gapped ability that it's not locally connected to the network, which, cloud environments are naturally air-gapped, okay, because they're away from the customer's network. So I think that's your first layer, are we air-gapped? Then it moves through to that data being stored is encrypted. How is it encrypted? What key is being used? Is that key being available to multiple people? And is that data what we define as immutable? In other words, it can be read, but it cannot be updated, it cannot be deleted. Okay, so you get that layer. So now you know that your backup data is sound. Okay, the next step is access to the applications that access those backups. So how are you logging in? Are you logging in using single sign-on? If you are using single sign-on, is it what are you using? Is it basically a Microsoft solution? Is it a solution from another vendor? Is it a solution from you need to understand which vendor you're using, and then you can apply your best practice. Now, most of my customers, what they'll do is they'll have some kind of single sign-on, but they'll also make sure that their backup technology has what's called a break glass login and password system integrated with MFA, which is the multi-factor authentication. So if your single sign-on system is attacked, you can still actually log into your backup, which is going to be great. So then once you've got your bottom layer sorted, you've got your login, you make sure using role-based action control that the right user accesses the right data. So a user who's managing Salesforce, for example, should not be able to access data in something like Microsoft 365, for example. It needs to be separated and segregated. And then the final layer for me is just that vision, that overall view. Who's logging in? What data is coming out? What data is being restored? And working with third-party tools, seeing technologies, whatever, to project and understand that layer. Okay.
Thanks, Colin. We've had an audience question in which is very relevant for what you're just talking about. You're talking about it's in cloud, so it's air gapped already, that kind of thing. So the question is, surely cloud is no panacea. Cloud companies represent a big target with a big attack surface, and vulnerabilities are constantly emerging. So it's basically a cost-risk equation. So sort of a question about the security of cloud, effectively.
Yeah, so the particular cloud that we use, obviously, but partnered with AWS, they have what we call a zero trust architecture. What they spend an awful inordinate amount of money to make sure their individual data centers are protected. And look at the regulations, by the way, that protect that data, whether it be 27001, whether it be things like you follow it, regulations like DORA and NIST, which is the cybersecurity framework. What you'll find, a lot of these things, and Cyber Essentials, for example, things to get into a data center, for example, you have to have facial recognition, multiple badge access, for example, and you have to have multiple levels of redundancy. So this is, for example, like AWS has, they have a region, and that region has a minimum of 3 data centers, right? A minimum. Some have 5 data centers, which are individually powered, cooled, etc. They're not interconnected from that you can actually to break into. So I would suggest that, obviously, I would be favorable of a cloud environment, but is that the same thing that you can guarantee about your data on premise? Do you have the same controls, the same ability to understand who's attacking the data? So I just think that these cloud vendors have invested heavily in making sure that they are a secure environment, and that hence I promote the trust of that data in the cloud.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thanks very much for that very comprehensive answer there, Colin. We're getting a bit short on time now, so I'm going to hand over to Ellen for our last set of research findings, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion at the end. So, Ellen, over to you.
Great, thanks, Tom. So in this next finding, we're looking more into the challenges that IT teams are facing. And respondents rated legacy solutions not keeping pace with security needs and a lack of resources or cybersecurity personnel as presenting the biggest challenge at the moment. This highlights the need to invest in the right technology, not only to ensure that you remain protected, but also to reduce the workloads of already overstretched teams and boost their productivity as well. This is especially key at the moment now that they're having to protect larger volumes of data and is maybe increasingly distributed with the rise of remote working. In this next finding, they were asked what's the most important thing to have in a data protection solution. And continuous monitoring was by far the most important element that came out of this, followed by reduced complexity and scalability. And it's clear that respondents want round-the-clock monitoring, but they don't want to introduce unnecessary complexity into their environments. And if they simplify both the access and the use of the observability of data, IT teams can enable better preparedness, faster incident response, and better root cause analysis. And in the next finding, we asked whether they're currently using AI and machine learning in data protection. 23% said that they are, and 60% said that they're not. And this shows that despite AI having numerous applications in cybersecurity and certainly receiving a lot of attention at the moment, many organizations are still fairly early on in the AI maturity curve in this area, and we'll likely see a lot more development in the near future. In this final finding, respondents were asked whether their organization has the internal resources to ensure that their data is secure. 68% of respondents are confident that they have the resources, with 14% disagreeing with the statement. So on the whole, that they're fairly confident in this area, which is good. But for those that do not have the resources, managed data security or a SaaS solution might be a good option.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Yeah, it is comforting to see that most people think they do have the resources. On that first slide, obviously we've seen there's plenty of challenges facing security staff. But of those points that Ellen raised right at the top there, let me just scroll back to it. So like legacy solutions not keeping pace with security needs, lack of visibility, high IT overhead costs, these kind of things. It feels like adopting a cloud solution could be the answer to most of those. What are your thoughts, Colin?
Yeah, the thing is the again, it goes on the layers of which and the effort that you need to put in place to make sure, yes, I've got a secure backup. And I can't underestimate the kind of work that goes into vulnerability management, patch management, access management, even where the data is stored. A lot of people use what we call precious metals to say where's your premium, your sort of like your gold data, your bronze data is stored, also stored. So I think that more and more companies are thinking that they're actually doing more and more data and more kind of, they understand where the data is, for example. But I think people should take a step back and have that analysis, like I told you before, where maybe you might have multiple companies that you've bought over time, is to like look and say, well, these are the backup products, these are what they've focused on. I wonder if anyone's ever stood back and thinking, as an overall holistic approach, have we got all the things covered, or is it just individual components that we think we've got covered? Because, you know, for the data that Ellen's been sending out, it could be someone that's come back, all they ever do is they look after maybe databases and they feel, yeah, I'm covered. That's my response. But I think it's more the holistic approach as to say, is all your data covered? And am I going to continue to buy storage, support the latest hardware, go through the whole worry about, is it still supported? Several of my customers, their storage arrays, for example, from years ago, they're having to find parts from all over the places. So I think really, Tom, the concept is just make your life a lot easier, right? If you can trust that service provider, like Druva, for example, to ensure that they've got your back, they're the ones protecting your data, and they can prove that they can't, even the vendor can't access your data, the data is available, and in that crunch crisis, and you know, we do lots of testing with our customers as well, show that it can be recovered. Okay.
Thanks, Colin. So talking of trust, I want to bring up the subject of AI, which Ellen touched on there. Attackers are already using AI, and we saw only 23% of people are using it in security. So what's the hold up on the defender's part, I suppose, is the biggest question.
Yeah, so I think really is understanding where AI can benefit this space. From Druva's perspective, we use AI with machine learning, and we just entered it. So we've got our AI tool called Druva, and its ability has started really by it's allowing customers to ask questions like, how can I restore in the most efficient manner? Did I have all my backups passed last night? So we're using that kind of methodology, and we're going through, but it's the machine learning piece that's still important. And I think people have jumped on this AI bandwagon more and more and more. But I think there's still this fundamental element that you've got to keep learning from the backup your data you're storing and, you know, what you're getting. Okay.
So that's a combination of a generative AI system, yes, in terms of a chatbot that you can query, and also the machine learning sort of more traditional back-end AI as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to that they should be interlinked, and that should be questioned. If you're doing RFPs or questions to those vendors, you should be asking that, you know, how does your product learn from the data we store? Okay.
Do you think that's the future of security, of AI security, linking those two systems?
Yeah, and it's the where the learning comes, it should be two attempts. It should be learning from the user and learning from the industry that user's in. So then you can bring that data in to say, by the way, all these manufacturing companies we've seen being attacked there. So that's where the AI can come into the learning and stuff like that. So I think more and more, Tom, it's that relationship and that integration between the two.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Colin. I've got one more question for you before we sort of wrap up here, which is that we've talked quite a bit today about legacy tooling and legacy software. We here at Computing, we talk to a lot of IT leaders. I've heard a lot of them say that they prefer to stick with legacy tools that they've developed and tweaked over many years to fit their environment, rather than going cloud. So I'm just interested to hear what you would say to people who have that opinion.
I think, again, it's people needing to step back and have a look at the overall cost of ownership of those particular solutions. And what happens if the person who's always been there, who's been tweaking it, maybe they're a contractor or whatever, and they've been creating that, what happens if they leave? What happens if they're not available? Okay, who are you going to call then? So I just think that more and more people are so busy that they focus on the job in hand rather than all the little parts of the job. And if there is a way of offloading the responsibility of the security of their backup data, the worry about vulnerability management, patch management, if there's a way that they can have a look at that, if I just didn't have to worry about that, what's that cost against putting all into a trusted service provider, and then knowing that and relaxing to know that that data is secure and I can always access it. I think it's back to cost of ownership, Tom. Someone just needs to maybe do a bit of maths and just see what's the value of keeping doing as the norm or changing to a new way of doing it. Okay.
Thank you, Colin. Right. That is going to bring us to the end of our time together. So I'm going to ask both of you for your closing thoughts. Eeny, meeny, miny. Oh, Ellen, let's start with you. Your closing thoughts on the topic, please.
Sure. So I think for me, the two main things that have come out of the research and also from the discussion that's been had today is the importance of backups. They've got to be immutable. They've got to be easy to restore, but also, as Colin said, making sure you're not accidentally restoring ransomware along with them. So a lot of care needs to be taken there. And also having this single pane of glass is so important when it comes to data, not only to spot these security vulnerabilities that might be hiding somewhere that you just don't have the visibility into, and also to have more of a holistic view of your data. You're making sure that you're getting the most value out of it by not having data in different teams, data in different parts of the organization that you're not getting the most out of.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for them. Colin, your closing thoughts on what we've talked about today.
I think that it's the emotion of being attacked that people don't understand. I actually get my team and myself, I actually sit on calls when people ring in to say we've been attacked, we're trying to go through our restore process, and it's just scary. I had a couple of guys absolutely in tears thinking, I've lost all my data, I don't know how to respond. And the great thing, and after that, when we had a chat with them afterwards, they said, you were great. I knew who to phone. Your instant response took us through step by step. It calmed us down. Even though we didn't have a run book, you helped almost like virtually develop one, and we got our data back. Thank you very much for that kind of approach. So I'm just saying, it's try and get your shoulder to lead on. If you get attacked, you can't underestimate the emotion of what you need to do to get your data back. Okay.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Colin. For me, the thing that stood out actually was what we talked about right at the end there about AI and combining the generative and the sort of more traditional side of things to really give it a boost in the security landscape. I think that's going to be a really fascinating area to watch. So that brings us to the end of the time we have. There is a white paper that we're going to be putting out on all this research. Everything that we've spoken about today, plus a little bit more, will be in that. So that will be sent to everyone who's registered for this webinar. And if you're watching this on demand, then you can ask about it on the computing. You can find it on the computing website as well a bit later. So that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. And Ellen and Colin, thank you for joining me in today's webinar. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.